Cooper nodded again, feeling like a bobblehead at this point. I've been meaning to ask, why did you get into sports anyway? Lynn shrugged. I like competing, being physical, she simply stated. I do too, Cooper said, but even I have my limits. You, on the other hand, don't seem to have a limit. You're constantly pushing and pushing yourself to become the best, like losing isn't the option. Lynn shrugged. I used to be that way. What do you mean? I used to think winning was the only thing that mattered, and losing made me less of an athlete, less of a winner. I less than worried with truth worth. Whenever I win, I gloat my bluff off and just bring the others down. One day my siblings had enough of me beating them at board games that conspired to beat against me against a stupid game called The Shelters of Catland. I finally lost the board game and I didn't take losing very well. I became more competitive than I already was. I tried to chug milk faster, wash dishes faster, create the loudest explosions, and fall asleep first, which was snore the loudest. It wasn't until I found out my siblings worked together and beat me to the purpose. I realized how far I was taking my gloating, so I decided to stop doing it in front of them. Now that I didn't stop, my win's always a win. I didn't realize that winning wasn't everything until much later. You see, when I wanted to win a basketball championship one time, so I could accomplish my goal on winning the champions at every sport I played, she told Cooper about the sports that she was going to show him after FLIBBR tattoo, which stood for football, lacrosse, ice hockey, baseball, basketball, and roller derby, but decided against it. But the thing I ended up being was being called them the turkey jerkies, and the other two, they weren't as skilled as I was. So I just made fun of them as they passed me with the ball. All I did was work myself, to which it worked for the first time, but not the second time. After that, I needed to find a few other people who were just as good as me. But the thing was, they weren't just willing to do as I was, and they were just better, ended up working on by themselves. And at that moment, I realized I didn't want to win. I just want to have fun. And the whole reason I started playing sports in the first place was to have fun, to stay physical, experience the excitement of playing the other two who weren't passionate about sports as I was. So I apologized to my teammates, and they finally accepted my apology, and we ended up losing the next game, which I didn't care. You know why? Because I had fun doing it. Cooper smiled. I'm glad you realize that winning isn't everything, but right now I say this winning battle against the Greens is everything. Lynn nodded. I get that. This isn't just a dumb game. It's real life with deadly consequences, which is why I plan to give it my all. There is another reason I started playing sports, to challenge myself, to achieve goals, to make my family proud. That's why I was originally becoming obsessing with winning when I was younger. I felt that if I lost, I'd let everyone down and become a failure. But I just wish I realized that sooner, so I didn't need to win all of those prizes just to prove myself. I've already been given the best prize ever, a great family who's always loved me no matter what. I don't plan on losing that, not now, not ever. They finished gathering what they could and loaded up. The sun had set and the world was plunged into darkness. Do you think they're going to show up tonight? Gage asked Brock. Hopefully not. These things sleep, so if we're lucky, they'll decide to rest up before they catch us, giving us plenty of time to set our traps. Brock put the last of the winning what he had won into the hardware store and got on the wagon as they set backwards towards the school. Luann was walking right next to Maggie. So, do you think you'll be able to shoot the traps before grown-ups arrive? Maggie asked. Luann looked at her and smiled. Don't question the master, she said, which made Maggie smile. Luna and Lynn were watching their backs as sister talked to those whose faces were pale with dark clothes and was quite a stark contrast to Luann's beaming face and colorful attitude. Quite an odd couple, Lynn remarked. Yeah, Luna agreed. I guess it's what they say about the opposites attract. I think they're cute, Shade said, who was just only a few feet behind them said. They reached the elementary school and saw the cars had moved all over the place. Since when did all the cars move? Ethan asked. I asked Duke to have a few kids move them around, Brock said. Why? Brock told them and they all already nodded. When they reached to return, Brock made orders to made everyone do what Luann told them to do. When it came to setting up traps around the school, and had Gage set up their own little traps around the cars outside. Meanwhile, Duke just stood around, barking pointless orders to try to get his best not to sound scared. Once they were all done, Brock told a boy named Jacob and a few others to head out in one direction, where the princess let her group mostly appear from, a boy named Jim keep an eye out, and the other direction for when they spotted another horde. They handed him both of flare guns to fire when they spotted them. They both nodded and headed off with their group. Brock watched them with both heads off as they stood for a few seconds, enjoying the silence that most likely wouldn't last long. He then headed back inside the school. The princess and her army had reached the shopping plaza. It was dark and everyone was tired. She wanted to press on, but she needed her beauty sleep. She needed to look as beautiful as possible for when she and her army reached and killed and devoured prey that she had heard earlier. Her loyal subjects sat down as she drifted off soon to sleep. She dreamt of hearing the children's limb from limb consuming every last bit of flesh that was attached to her delicious skin. Sweet dreams. The next morning, Chris stood on the balcony of the mansion, admiring his army at the early morning light. There were well over 1,000 of them, as well as all his. In order to look to order around, he did his to make his dirty work, his to die for him. He then looked at the ones that were almost as powerful as him. There were Crony, his smiling, creepy smile, a huge carrying sledgehammer he was glad to have on his side, a muscular shirtless, holding bricks in both hands, a tall, greasy one wearing Magnetic's uniform. "All right, let's move out," Chris ordered, pointing towards Royal Woods. His army let out a ferocious roar as it began to march in the direction of the next town. They flipped cars, knocked over street lamps, tore down wooden billboards. Everything that wasn't bolted to the ground was ripped up, pulverized, and torn asunder in the army made. They made their way out of Huntington Oaks and into Royal Woods. They soon reached the high school where Chris had ordered his army to stop. A football field of high school looked like a bomb had dropped on it. Dead bodies, cars, chunks of metal littered the fields. "What do you think could have done this?" Crony asked. "Isn't it obvious?" Chris said. "Kids. They're getting brave. Fighting back. We can't let that happen, can we?" Crony nodded. Chris then looked at the large adult with the sledgehammer and had an idea formed on his head. He ordered the other grown-ups to arm up with what they could, and a lot of them began to pick up pieces of chunk metal that could be used to strike, bludgeon, or stab kids. A few adults, however, were too weak to carry the weapons. "We should send the weaker ones to the front of the group," Chris told Crony. "Meanwhile, you, me, and the sledgehammer, with the ones with the bricks, with the greasy one, will stay at the back of the group." "Good idea," Crony said to Chris. "We didn't have anything happen to you now, did we? If anything happened to you and me, then those were the 3 times the army was confused and useless." Chris furrowed his brows. "What do you mean?" "There are 5 of us. Only the thing's given this army a sense of order. If anything were to happen to us, they'd be useless. No sense of direction. Like a car without a driver." "Damn," Chris said, as he nodded his head and thought back to his younger days in college when he and his roommates used to play Super Mega Brawler's Turbo Fighter, and his roomie would pause the game to go to the bathroom. Chris would unpause the game and go into town to the poor defenseless character. "Looks like more people came to join us," Crony told Chris. He looked at the adults exiting the school. A lot of them were teenagers and one looked like teachers. One of them was an older-looking, casually dressed teacher with red hair, carrying a fluffy pillow. What was the plan to do that? "Excellent," Chris said. "The more the merrier." He and Crony were about to continue on with the army when Crony spotted a weak, feeble teen emerging from the school crawling. "Wait," he implored Chris. "What?" "That girl over there." Crony pointed to the blonde teen who was just trying to crawl but having a lot of trouble doing so. "What about her?" Crony didn't know what to tell Chris, but for some reason he felt sorry for this girl. She was wearing a light green-blue dress that was tattered and torn with stained with blood. As they got closer, they could see she had a broken leg, and its bone was sticking out. "She's no use to us. Leave her," Chris said to him. Crony hated the thought of this poor girl being forced to crawl everywhere while slowly rotting away. Is it alright if I put her down? Crony asked. Fine, whatever. Just hurry. Chris began to walk away as Crony took out a dagger, then made his way towards the blonde girl, who was scowling yet a pathetic look about her. Crony knelt down in front of her and placed her under her chin to make her look at him. She had the sky blue irises that were surrounded by a sea of yellow sclera. He could tell that this girl had the most beautiful was taken over. Oh well, Crony had lifted the knife, shoved it right back in her head. He felt her body go limp. He watched the life instantly drain from her eyes. He then got up and followed Chris and his army, leaving her body to rot. Back at the school, Brock was waiting for the few others on the roof of the school, ready to stop and spring into action so should Jacob and Jim fire their flares. Duke was steadily rocking back and forth on his fox throne in the auditorium. They were once done setting up the traps. He and Joy went back to the auditorium just to rest up a bit. It wasn't long until the gravity of the situation finally hit him. He soon realized that he was scared out of his mind, so scared that there was no way he would be able to go out there and fight these grown-ups. However, he just stood next to him, axe in hand, not a care in the world. Stan rested next to Mary, who had her in his arms, wrapped around her brother as they slept into the home economics room. They didn't leave each other's side since Stan got back and never wanted to leave her side again. She was the only thing that mattered to him more, and the only thing that kept him calm when suppressed was all the feeling of malice that was in his heart. He didn't want anything to happen to her and would do anything to protect her. Meanwhile, Speck sat in the chair about a few feet away from them. His arms were folded and his hammer J on the front of him. His gun rested comfortably in his coat pocket. He was trying his best to stay awake, but all his eyelids kept getting heavier and heavier as he kept jerking his head up whenever he drifted off. A few hours later, Lincoln woke up in the gym, surrounded by his sisters who were all asleep. He all looked at their peaceful, sleeping faces. It was the dawn of the new day. Everyone had been all night preparing for the arrival of the adults. Lincoln was surprised they still hadn't shown up yet. Maybe they were never going to show up. Maybe they were just going to miss the school completely. Maybe everything was going to be all right. Just then, the gym door swung open, and a kid rushed in and began to yell, "They're here!"